So, who tries to predict the future for you? Do you rely on any forecasts? The weather report? Your horoscope? I'm hoping not. Political polls? Well, that works out well, doesn't it? And every day, I wanted to say, I get this email from the Wall Street Journal, and it's a summary of the news, but it's got this little part in there that says, here's what we say the Dow Jones Industrial Average is going to do, or the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ 100, and I have no idea how accurate that is because that's not my job. I don't have to pay attention to that. But you have to wonder, everybody wants to know the future. But I wonder if for all we chase after it, whether knowing the future would really make us happier. For 6 chapters of the book of Daniel, we've been exploring this, great man, his biography. Now in chapter 7, the focus shifts from public displays of God's power in Babylon to Daniel's private visions of the future. The final 6 chapters are all written in the first person, and they reveal 4 apocalyptic visions. Apocalypse, there's a word for you. It may sound ominous, but all it means is revelation. The book of Revelation at the end of the Bible is the Greek word apocalypsis is its title. So it doesn't mean only bad things. These visions, though intense, ultimately show God's victory over evil. And so the book's theme remains, despite appearances, God is in control. The first half demonstrated God's power over Babylon's rulers, and now we move from earthly trials to ultimate salvation, from deliverance in a furnace or a lion's den to God's victory over death. While Daniel's visions are rich in symbolism, not every detail needs exact interpretation. It's more like poetry. The impact lies in their overall message rather than in precise explanation. It's more like metaphor than a jigsaw puzzle. So it still ends up being a bit mysterious even after we're given an interpretation. These visions reveal a cosmic struggle between good and evil, which is pretty cool. And one that ends up with God's enemies defeated and his kingdom established under the Son of Man. So let's begin. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, and here's where it turns to first person, "In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea." So is it significant that these beasts came up out of the sea? That's kind of different. The imagery of strange monsters in a turbulent sea would have reminded Daniel's original readers of the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, where a turbulent sea and weird monsters represent the forces of chaos. These forces were led by the goddess Tiamat, and she has a form of a dragon in the story. They have to be defeated by Marduk, the god of Babylon, before he can create the ordered world. Among the weapons he takes for this battle with Tiamat are the 4 winds. But you don't need to know Babylonian mythology to know that the Jewish people at this time would be very familiar with how the Old Testament often talks about God's power over the waters. The Old Testament also associates churning waters with the raging world and roaring people. In fact, in Isaiah, we read, "Woe to the many nations that rage. They rage like the raging sea. Woe to the peoples who roar. They roar like the roaring of great waters. Although the peoples roar like the roar of surging waters, when he rebukes them, they flee far away, driven before the wind like chaff on the hills, like tumbleweed before a gale." Now, the New Testament also picks up on this association of turbulent water with chaos and sin even. So in Revelation, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea." Now that sounds strange to us, because a lot of us, like me, love the sea. We want to go to the seashore. But what it meant for them was there will be no more chaos, which is great. And of course, the wind and the sea obey Jesus' command when the disciples are caught up in a storm on the Sea of Galilee. So the sea, chaos, that's what it meant to Israelites. So what all this means is Daniel was probably already troubled from the moment he saw this tumultuous sea. But then it gets worse. Up from this chaotic sea come 4 beasts. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." After that, I looked, the third beast, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings, like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the other former beasts, and it had 10 horns. Well, this part of the vision will be explained later in the chapter to Daniel, and he's told the 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth. So it's very much like Nebuchadnezzar's dream about that great statue. Remember that? The gold head, the chest and arms of silver, bronze, belly and thighs, and iron legs. And the first beast does represent Babylon, the lion with an eagle's wings. Remember how Nebuchadnezzar had become like a beast and then was restored to sanity? That's probably what's meant by, and the mind of a human was given to the lion. The bear, raised up on one of its side, most likely refers to the superior status of the Persians in the Medo-Persian Empire. The 3 ribs, they might represent some conquests, who knows. The leopard with 4 wings probably represents how quickly Alexander the Great came through hundreds of years later, after this prophecy. Came through in 334 to 330 BC and conquered the world. And the 4 heads correspond to the 4 generals who divided up his kingdom after he died at a young age. This 4th beast, with its great power, seems to point to the Roman Empire. Its 10 horns may correspond to the 10 toes on Nebuchadnezzar's statue. So, what this tells us is that the first part of Daniel's dream really did come true. But wait, back up, Carolyn. 10 horns? What is all that about? Well, in Old Testament times, the horn was a symbol of power and strength. In Mesopotamian art, both gods and kings are depicted with horned headgear. So this beast with its 10 horns has 5 times the normal 2. So that would mean extraordinary power. And Daniel, like us, focuses on the horns. He's very interested. He says, "While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully." Okay, that's extremely strange. And I'm going to leave you hanging about the interpretation of this until after Daniel asks about the little horn in the final section of this chapter. But right now, the dream takes a new turn. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire. Its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I love this title, The Ancient of Days. The thrones, there were plural thrones set up, and we'll get back to that. They were set in place, and the Ancient of Days takes his seat. Only in Daniel is God referred to as the Ancient of Days. But it's such a wonderful, majestic title. God exists eternally. He always was, he is, and he will always be. His clothing was white as snow, representing righteousness. His hair was white, signaling his wisdom. And then all that fire. Oh my goodness, the throne is flaming. Wheels on the throne were ablaze. A river of fire was flowing before him. Well, fire represented his power and judgment, and we will see that later in this dream. Our God is supremely awe-inspiring. I could just stop here and worship, couldn't you? I love this. Even though God is spirit, symbolic physical descriptions like this are often used in the Bible to tell us important things about God's nature. The early rabbis thought that God appeared in the Exodus as a young, black-haired holy warrior. But here God appears as a wise and honorable judge. The presence of the thrones implies a courtroom, and Daniel says the court was seated and the books were opened. The stage is set for the last judgment. That's what this is. Daniel said that 1,000 thousands were serving the Ancient of Days. Then he ups his estimate to 10,000 times 10,000, probably still feeling that might not be quite enough. Interestingly, this also parallels John in the book of Revelation. He tried to describe the throne room of God and numbers the crowd at 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. And once everything is in place, the court comes to order. But very quickly, Daniel learns that he's not there to witness a trial. He's at a sentencing. Then I continued to watch. Because of the boastful words, the horn was still speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. Daniel watched until this beast was slain. As for the rest of the beasts, I don't understand, but somehow they had their dominion taken away, but they still continue to live. So at the trial, what books are opened? We can't really know for sure. Likely they continued the works, the good and bad of these beasts/nations and of this little horn. And here's what John says in the book of Revelation. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. So Daniel and John do seem to both be describing the same thing, the same event. A day will come when Jesus will return to rule from his throne in God's courtroom. At the second coming, the Antichrist and his false prophet, as we learn about in Revelation, will be the first to receive eternal judgment of being cast into the lake of fire. Here in Daniel, judgment is given against entire kingdoms, but John's revelation seems to be about everyone. Daniel's vision continues, and it's very cool. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So, we have an Old Testament description of the Messiah. Son of man, like you'd think, just means a human being, but this person is like a son of man. Like a human being, and he rides on the clouds and has direct access to the Ancient of Days, so also very much like a god. And in fact, all nations, peoples, and language worshipped him. Again, I feel like we could stop here at this wonderful description and fall on our faces in worship. Jesus, as you know, calls himself the Son of Man, and that's what got him in trouble. People nowadays think, oh, Jesus always called himself Son of Man. That meant that he believed himself to only be a human being. He was referring back to Daniel. He was not referring to himself as just a human being. So what got him in trouble was with the high priest. Again, the high priest, Caiaphas, asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus. and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. If you know Daniel, that can hardly be more clear. There's that second throne, too, that Daniel mentioned, thrones. In the end, Jesus will be sitting there at the right hand of the Ancient of Days. Now we get a little more detailed interpretation in the final section of this chapter. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit. Yes, I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kings that will rise from the earth, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. So we've already gone over this part, what the four beasts represented. But now the thing that's new here is the holy people of the Most High. Daniel's dream reminds us that spiritual war stands behind human conflicts, worldwide conflicts. So perhaps this refers to both humans and angels. We only know that God will win this great cosmic battle, but I'm betting that we are directly involved in this war because we will inherit the kingdom. We are his holy people, according to Paul. In Colossians, Paul says, the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. So, we're in it. We must be directly involved in this battle also because Paul also says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, to stand. We are soldiers in this battle between good and evil. And we need to remember this. It seems maybe a little overly dramatic, but it's not. It's reality. Well, with that in mind, Daniel really wants more information about that fourth beast. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head, and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and oppress his people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept that matter to myself. So, can we identify this fourth kingdom? Scholars have argued that the fourth kingdom must be Rome, and the 10 horns should be identified as 10 kingdoms that arise from Rome. Now, to be followed by a final rebel in the New Testament called the Antichrist. This little horn will be defeated at the conclusion of this great cosmic struggle. And that's a point at which the world has not yet arrived, obviously. So, I don't know if the fourth kingdom is Rome. And I can't tell you who the 10 horns represent, or the 3 horns that will be overthrown by the little horn. I don't know. I can tell you that John Calvin, Reformed guy, hundreds of years ago, did believe that the 10 horns were the Roman Caesars who persecuted the church, and the little horn was Nero. And next week we'll be talking about how some prophecies do get fulfilled twice or more. I just know that the final judgment hasn't happened yet, and this prophecy will be fulfilled. There will be a battle. There will be oppression. God's people will appear to be losing the battle until the Ancient of Days makes his judgment. In the meantime, you may have other questions. I know I do. What does a time, times, and half a time mean? Well, the word time simply is plural. It doesn't necessarily mean twice whatever that first time is. But this phrase is usually taken to be a poetic way of saying 3.5 years. Again, who knows? As half of the perfect number 7, it probably means a vaguely symbolic way of saying a short period of oppression. That might be one of your questions. Another question you might have is, why was Daniel still troubled by a vision that predicted God's victory? Well, I believe he was because it also revealed a time of great turmoil and suffering before the final judgment. He saw the battle. He was horrified by it. He was horrified to see the holy people of God being defeated. All I can say is the key message of these prophecies is clear. Nothing can stand in the way of God's promise to restore and establish his everlasting kingdom. Our response should be prayerful preparation and expectation. Daniel reminds us that even the greatest kingdoms and rulers are no match for our sovereign God, the King of the universe. History has shown that earthly empires do crumble. All of them have. All of them will. But God's kingdom will endure forever. And Daniel also reveals God's power to triumph over evil. The Ancient of Days will be vindicated before all nations. Our role is to put on the armor of God, stand firm, and fight in the battle between good and evil. Amen.